Tonight, the battle for second.
Every time he lies.
When you need someone standing and fight for you, don't look for Nikki Haley.
The remaining Republican candidates look to defeat GOP frontrunner Donald Trump.
I have polls that show me leading by a tremendous amount.
Plus, the latest in the Israel-Hamas war, as anti-Semitic incidents across the U.S. surge by an astounding 360%. And inflationary fight. Prices tick back up as the Fed's effort to combat record-high costs continues. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
A debate and a dropout with just days to go to the Iowa caucuses. Thanks for joining us. I'm John Jessup.
And good evening in Washington. I'm Jenna Browder. With the exception of former President Trump, the shrinking field of Republican presidential candidates is on the ground in Iowa trying to connect with voters.
Trump leads most polls by a long shot. The two other top White House hopefuls, Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, are fighting for a strong showing in the caucuses to fuel their campaigns going forward.
George Thomas begins our coverage tonight with the election 2024 latest.
Good to see you, buddy.
The former New Jersey governor's sudden exit comes days before the first votes in the Republican contest are cast in Iowa next week.
And it's clear to me tonight that there isn't a path for me to win the nomination.
Christie, who focused much of his campaign on going after frontrunner Donald Trump, left with this parting shot.
I am going to make sure that in no way do I enable Donald Trump ever be president of the United States again.
Christie's departure is seen as a boost for Nikki Haley.
Every time he lies, Drake University, don't turn this into a drinking game because you will be overserved by the end of the night.
Who went head-to-head in a heated debate with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in Iowa Wednesday night.
When you need someone standing and fight for you, don't look for Nikki Haley. You won't be able to find her if you had a search warrant.
The face-off had them debating Trump's record, border security, the war in Gaza, and funding for Ukraine's defense against Russia.
Nikki Haley clearly has the most to gain right now. She seems to have some momentum, but it's one thing to have momentum on paper. It's another thing running up against Donald Trump.
The former president, who is leading in the polls by big margins, was a no-show again in this debate, choosing instead to take part in a Fox News-sponsored town hall. At the same time, his two rivals were sparring on CNN.
I have polls that show me leading by a tremendous amount in New Hampshire and a lot in Iowa, and nationwide we're leading by almost 60 points.
Trump also said he knows who his VP choice will be, but gave no name. George Thomas, CBN News.
Thank you, George. Let's bring in Nathan Gonzalez, editor and publisher of Inside Elections and a Faith Nation contributor. Nathan, so what did you make of the DeSantis-Haley debate, and was it at all overshadowed by the Trump town hall?
Trump got what he was looking for. He had the stage to himself on Fox, while Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis were at the kids' table on CNN. And I think that's the contrast that the former president was trying to portray. You know, did the Nikki Haley DeSantis debate really move the needle all that much? I'm not sure that it did. I think it's still clear that you'd rather be Nikki Haley in the race in terms of the direction rather than DeSantis. I mean, DeSantis, it looks like he peaked the moment before he got into the race, and ever since he got into the race earlier in 2023, he's gone down.
Maybe along those lines, the needle wasn't moved during the debate, but there is a new Suffolk University poll showing Nikki Haley in second place in Iowa ahead of Ron DeSantis. It has her up by 7 points over the Florida governor. If DeSantis comes in third in Iowa, Nathan, is his campaign all but over?
Yes. I mean, that's the
short answer.
New Hampshire is not going to get any better for DeSantis. He's going to finish third or fourth in New Hampshire, and then he would have to wait all the way until basically South Carolina. I know Nevada is in between there, but that's kind of a mess of its own. I think if DeSantis finishes third in Iowa, then the clock will be quickly running out on his campaign.
Yeah, you mentioned New Hampshire. Nikki Haley, she's also up in New Hampshire, closing the gap between her and Trump there. Some polls showing by as much as 10 points. Then, of course, South Carolina also expected to do well there. It does seem like momentum and the map, Nathan, are on her side.
Yeah, well, New Hampshire is a place where she should be able to make a bigger splash, but we have to remember that the New Hampshire electorate is more moderate. There are fewer evangelicals that are going to vote in New Hampshire, and so even if Haley does well there, maybe she pulls off a win, which was still we still don't know yet. Actually, South Carolina, even though it's a home state, I think that electorate is more friendly to Trump, and his campaign is really built for the long game. And heading into 16 states into Super Tuesday, it's going to be hard, I think, for Haley to overcome him. It's possible. We should all be open-minded, but I think this is still Trump's nomination to lose.
Just a few seconds left here, Nathan. Former President Trump during the town hall says he knows who his running mate will be. He didn't give us any indication, but do you have any guesses?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to tell you right now. No, I think it's going to be, I think either South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, I think Nikki Haley's in the mix, put Senator Tim Scott in the mix, Carrie Lake of Arizona, even though she's running for Senate, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik of New York, and we should probably put a dark horse of Tucker Carlson on that list. But if it's not one of those six, then you can, I don't know, I'll owe you both dinner.
Nathan, that's a pretty extensive list. I'm impressed that you spouted off all those names. Nathan Gonzalez with Inside Elections. We always appreciate your insights. Thank you, Nathan.
Thanks, Nathan.
Good to see you.
Well, overseas tensions are rising across the Middle East. Iran reportedly seizing an oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman. This is the latest escalation after a series of attacks from Houthi-backed rebels in Yemen against shipping vessels and U.S. warships in the Red Sea. It's all happening as U.S. officials scramble to find an end game for the war in Gaza. Today, Hezbollah fired dozens of rockets into northern Israel from Lebanon. Meanwhile, to the south, more than 100 hostages are still being held by Hamas, and the Israeli military is now reporting evidence of hostages found in a vast underground tunnel network in the Gaza Strip. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is wrapping up a week-long trip to the Middle East, meeting with Arab and Muslim nations.
If you build that integration, if you bring Israel in, if you make the necessary commitments to security, and you move down the path to a Palestinian state, that's the single best way to isolate, to marginalize Iran and the proxies that are making so much trouble for us and for pretty much everyone else in the region.
The path to an endgame in the war comes as South Africa formally accuses Israel of committing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. Israel is denouncing the claim.
Well, here at home, new data puts into perspective the rise in anti-Semitism in the United States since the war began. In the 3 months between October 7th and January 7th, anti-Semitic incidents jumped 360%, with an average of 34 such situations reported daily. Figures from the Anti-Defamation League found more than 1,300 cases of verbal or written harassment. In that same time, there were 553 cases of anti-Semitic vandalism and 60 cases of assaults. Well, joining us now to talk more about rising anti-Semitism is Rabbi Abraham Cooper of the Simon Wiesenthal Center. Rabbi Cooper, thank you so much for being here. You just heard those statistics. First off, your reaction to the rise in anti-Semitic attacks.
Well, unfortunately, the statistics that have been released mirror what we've been hearing from the members of the Simon Wiesenthal Center and the public across the United States. There's no question that October 7th, which marked the day of the massacre by Hamas terrorists of Israeli civilians and the kidnappings and the rapes, also unleashed globally across Europe and here in the United States, thousands of rallies on behalf of Hamas in the U.S., well over 900. The language that was unleashed is Hamas language, not just anti-Israel, but genocidal, and also spawned many acts of anti-Semitic violence and rhetoric. In fact, when you also factor in what happened at our airport, outside of our airports, on highways across the United States and elsewhere, we've actually asked the head of the FBI to investigate, if you will, holistically, whether we're looking now at domestic terrorism, because there is an obvious coordination and a spillover. We haven't heard back yet from the administration. And then, of course, the perfect storming included what's going on in our nation's campuses. where academics, too many of them, and unfortunately many people who run the administrations have given a free pass to pro-Hamas elements. And when you combine that with the 24/7 drumbeat of anti-Semitic hate on social media, you have these absolutely shocking statistics that are affecting Jews all over the United States.
So Israel is defending itself in the International Criminal Court against accusations of genocide in Gaza. We just reported South Africa making those accusations. Do proceedings like this, Rabbi, help to fuel the anti-Semitism we're seeing?
Well, they help to legitimize and mainstream the anti-Semitic hate. I mean, South Africa is openly pro-Hamas. I just saw that the president of South Africa yesterday embraced the head of the Janjaweed terrorists who are terrorizing the people in Darfur. If anyone should be in the docket right now for crimes against humanity and for these kinds of crimes, it should be Hamas. The world seems to be upside down right now. And I think also part of the blame is right at the feet of the United Nations, starting with Secretary General Guterres, including UNICEF, especially UNRWA, their special rapporteurs. The reaction to the largest number of Jews murdered in one day since the Nazi Holocaust was,
and that's going to have to be the last word. I'm so sorry, Rabbi Cooper, we are out of time. Rabbi Abraham Cooper with the Simon Wiesenthal Center, thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, John and Janet. Nice to hear from you.
You too. Well, from inflation to unemployment, where people say they are really feeling the budget pinch. Next. Welcome back. In economic news tonight, new reports show persistently higher prices across America, a sign the Federal Reserve's drive to slow inflation to its 2% target will likely remain a bumpy one.
The new report from the Labor Department shows overall prices rose 3.4% from a year ago. CBN Washington correspondent Hillary Powell joins us now for a deeper dive into today's report. Hillary, what's behind the rising numbers?
Well, John, Jenna, more than half the increase in prices from November to December reflect higher housing costs. There's also energy costs, along with food prices that have contributed to inflation. Now, a survey of Americans from all different racial backgrounds, they basically agree that the government should prioritize both the economy and foreign policy issues this election year.
For Megan Cherry in Temple Terrace, Florida, feeding a family of 6 means cutting what makes it into the grocery cart.
So things that aren't necessary for meals are kind of getting cut out.
Inflation has cooled in recent months, but remains top of mind for many Americans, like the Cherry family. Thursday's report from the Labor Department showed that overall prices rose 0.3% from November, despite the slowdown in price increases, along with steady economic growth, low unemployment, and healthy hiring. Polls show many Americans are dissatisfied with the economy. That disconnect is a likely issue in the 2024 elections. About 7 in 10 U.S. adults name economic issues as a top 5 topic they'd like the government to prioritize in 2024, making it the most commonly mentioned issue. Experts say much of the public remains frustrated by higher prices. Prices are still 17% higher than they were before the inflation surge began and are still rising. According to an Axios.com vibe check, if you're a Republican, rural, renting, a woman, or living single, you disproportionately feel anxious and funky about your finances. At Covenant Baptist Church's food pantry in Southwest D.C., co-coordinator Craig Johnson has seen so much more demand, families are now allowed to come once a week instead of once a month.
So our numbers have been going up steadily since the end of the pandemic.
One economy expert says the Federal Reserve overpromised what they could deliver, leaving people pessimistic about their pocketbooks.
This inflation is permanently high. Prices are never going to come down. So that's one thing, is that people were told us one thing, and what's happening is different than what they expected. But combined with the fact that their sentiment is low, what it really looks like is people are afraid to quit their jobs.
Okay, in a statement by President Joe Biden, he says of the report, quote, "We saw prices go down over the course of the year for goods and services that are important to American households, like a gallon of gas, also a gallon of milk." But he admits there's still more work to be done. Economists say there has never been as wide a gap between the underlying health of the economy and public perception.
All right, Hillary Powell, thank you very much. With that, we are joined by Mark Hamrick, Washington Bureau Chief and Senior Economic Analyst for Bankrate. Mark, welcome. So not a great report. Inflation ticking up more than expected. The news comes after the Fed had signaled it could begin cutting interest rates this year. But does this report actually suggest the central bank will keep rates up? And are we in for another rate hike?
Well, let me try to unpack that barrage of questions that you shared with me there, Jenna. First of all, yes, this was a little bit disappointing. We had hoped that we would see a more encouraging report here, but there are some things that I would also say are a little more reassuring. And for example, energy prices are down 2% year over year. What we saw in the month was an increase in gasoline prices as well as electricity, but a decline in natural gas prices, which people use to heat their homes, of course. And the price of food at home is actually up just 1.3%, which that really shows that the food prices that are most important to us are simmering. But to your point, the Federal Reserve has not promised that it's going to cut interest rates, but members gave an indication that those rate cuts could begin this year, and financial markets have rallied on those hopes. But we'll have a Federal Reserve meeting at the end of the month, and I think the table is still set for the possibility of rate cuts as we get deeper into the year. But investors and consumers probably need to buckle in because this is going to continue to be a bumpy ride.
Mark, to the point that Hillary made just a moment ago about the gap between public perception and the underlying health of the economy, food price inflation was up again last month. Many people say grocery prices seem higher than what the government reports. Why the discrepancy? Are the government figures accurate?
We have a large amount of distrust and mistrust in institutions in this country, and so it's not unusual for people to question the validity of information they get either from the news media or the government. We can't do anything about that. The data collecting apparatus of the federal government is reliable in my estimation, but the other part is, of course, that inflation does have outsized negative impacts on individuals, and the health of the job market only goes so far in mitigating that impact.
Yeah, and with prices ticking up and down, the bottom line is we're still 17% higher than when the surge began. So people are feeling that. All told, we're still seeing a strong jobs market out there, Mark. Do you expect a slowdown this year?
We do, and economists do. And so it's been remarkable that the job market has remained as robust and resilient as it has. The unemployment rate's still below 4%, but economists surveyed by Bankrate, our quarterly survey, believe that we will see the unemployment rate rising above 4% this year, and that we will see the number of jobs added really about a third as many as were added last year.
Okay. All right, Mark Hamrick with Bankrate. Great to see you. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Immigration in an election year. Next on Faith Nation, a look at how the church is considering the humanitarian crisis ahead of November.
Welcome back. Immigration and border security are creating political pressure for both Congress and presidential candidates.
Now, the issue is one of the most divisive topics in the country, but many faith leaders say it's time for the harsh rhetoric to end, calling instead for a balanced approach to border problems. CBN's Heather Sells reports.
For President Biden, this growing problem is becoming a political nightmare. Last year's record crossings have resulted in migrants being bused to crowded cities, earning him the wrath of Democratic governors and mayors. For GOP presidential candidates, it's potentially a winner. Polling shows Republicans leading on the immigration issue and former President Trump gaining some ground among Latino voters. In recent weeks, however, Trump's words on immigrants have taken an extreme turn.
They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done.
Some church leaders are pushing back, like former Trump faith advisor Sam Rodriguez.
That rhetoric does not in any way, form, or shape activate the Hispanic electorate, which is naturally conservative. That community will be alienated if you continue to push them against the wall by deeming immigrants as a poison.
We're called to consider this issue of immigration very thoughtfully, but one to do so with compassion and love.
Mile Green, the president of World Relief, calls that kind of talk unbiblical. He also cites polling that shows Christians support immigration reform.
We know that from a public policy standpoint that many evangelical Christians want to see substantive, meaningful policy change. And what we're getting from presidential candidates is rhetoric that is meant to divide people and cause fear in people's hearts.
Trump has touted an immigration policy that is tougher than challengers Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. He has promised the largest deportation campaign in U.S. history, and he's calling for blocking people with certain beliefs from entering the U.S.
This comes as anti-persecution groups like Open Doors warn that Christians fleeing violence are struggling to find countries that will take them in.
The doors are closing for persecuted Christians around the world, many of whom were trying to utilize the southern border as a path to enter this country, fleeing religious persecution in other parts of the world.
Green says those with legitimate claims need a clear path to asylum. Meanwhile, evangelist Franklin Graham is putting a spiritual priority on the border, planning a 10-city tour this spring. Rodriguez says he is hoping for a presidential campaign that acknowledges the need for border security and reform and includes the vital role of immigrants.
Immigrants are a blessing to America. Without immigration, we would not have America.
Heather Sells, CBN News.
Thank you, Heather. Coming up, kicking off 2024 with a spiritual outpouring. Next on Faith Nation. Well, finally tonight, what some are calling an outpouring of the Holy Spirit. More than 50,000 young people traveled to Atlanta over New Year's for the annual Passion Conference.
And now evangelist Matt Brown says what he's seeing is revival happening across the country, with more than 100,000 young people gathering to seek God from Georgia to Kentucky to Tennessee and Iowa and Missouri. That's the scene. Brown is joining with other Christian leaders, encouraging 1 million young people to fast and pray for revival through the month of January.
I heard there were more than 150 countries represented, 1,500 schools.
So cool.
Yep.
Great way to start the year. Wow.
Great night.